Hi, we're here for the Broad Universe Rapid Fire Reading. Broad Universe is an organization that supports women in speculative fiction. It is not solely women. In the membership, we hope that we'll have a couple of men who may join us later on in the RFR, as we call it. But we are going to start. So the idea of the RFR is that we each read for a short amount of time, give you a taste of our work, and invite you then, of course, to look us up later. We're going to start today with Emily Leverett. And then we'll go around the table, give a very quick introduction, and read for about 8 minutes. That includes your introduction, so I will start my timer. Hi. And when you hear the sound, then just kind of get to your concluding point.
Hi, I'm Emily Leverett. I write fantasy and urban fantasy. I edit fantasy, science fiction, and horror, and I'm a medievalist English professor. So this is from a current work in progress that is right now an untitled urban fantasy about a 72-year-old woman in Raleigh who has a sort of semi-magical adventure. Millie's hands trembled, but it was nothing to do with old age. The brown envelope thrummed with a quiet power. Whatever was inside, under a layer of bubble wrap, wanted out. She shuddered. The postmark didn't offer any comfort either. The only person she knew in the UK was her ex. She should have known the past would come back. Nearly 5 decades of nothing had led her believe the pretty lie that the past sins could stay dead and buried. Now, here they were, making her hand shake and her heart race. Whatever she did now, open the envelope, burn it, shove it in a drawer, didn't matter. The moment she touched it, the giant rock got kicked off the top of the hill. Nothing she could do would push it back up again. Best case scenario, she'd be the only one it crushed on the way down. "Miss Millie?" Freddie asked. "Are you okay? Do you want me to get the nurse?" She hadn't heard the young man come in. Tall, way taller than she was, though that wasn't hard. He had a brilliant smile, it matched his intellect, and a laugh that filled the room. Dark, curly hair, or it would have been, tight curls too, if he hadn't kept it close cropped like he was in the military. Dark brown eyes and dark skin. A cheerful optimism that came with only 20 years on this good earth. No, she forced herself to smile at him. I was off in my own world. "What have you got there?" He nodded at the envelope. "Nothing important," she said. She wanted to pick the thing up by the corner and drop it in a vat of molten metal, but that wouldn't have gotten rid of whatever was inside. Instead, she shoved it into the pocket of her cardigan and gestured at the other easy chair. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me about your day. You get that big test back?" Freddie dumped his backpack on the floor between the two chairs. "I did." He didn't elaborate, but headed toward the kitchen. "Get you something?" he called. "Bourbon." She'd have asked for bourbon. Neat, with the bottle, too. Except that she hadn't had any since she'd moved in, and Antiques and Curators Community Living were a bit tense about having alcohol in the rooms on account of the under-21 crowd. "I'll take a Coke." He returned her Coke in a glass with ice, the way she liked it, and a tall glass of plain water for him. He dropped into the other chair, took a long drink, and smiled. Turns out Dr. I Don't Give A's should change his name. Good for you. She'd spent hours with flashcards quizzing him on anatomy terms that she, at first, could barely pronounce. After the work they'd done, she could pass the test, too. She thought about med school once, but decided against it. Too much blood and bones. "I'm going to keep my 4.0 GPA, he said. He shook his head like he couldn't quite believe it. "The rest of the semester, then only 2 more to go." "Have you thought any more about where you want to apply to medical school?" Millie certainly had thought about it, and her happiness for his success always tinged with sadness at his leaving. Even if he stayed local, graduate students weren't eligible for housing here. He shrugged. "I like Duke, but after going to UNC, I don't think I could do it." He laughed. "Dr. No Way has suggested the Ivies, but I don't know if I want to deal with all the crap. I know I already feel out of place. I don't need more people telling me I don't belong." "I get it," she said. What she wanted to say was "fuck them," but she'd given up cursing when she'd given up drinking. Both honed her already sharp edges like razors and scattered her focus from a laser to a shotgun blast. Not good for people work. Back when she was Freddie's age, very few non-white male folks went past a bachelor's, or so her professor had said as he congratulated her on being in the first law class at the University of Texas Law School that allowed women, right after he ogled her breasts and right before he put his hand on her ass. Millie guessed that Freddie wouldn't have that happen, but he'd certainly have his own kind of shit to deal with. "You're as good as anyone else. You know that." "I know," he nodded. He was placating her. It wasn't false modesty from this kid. Even with the cool smile and the confident demeanor, she'd recognized the self-doubt hiding in his eyes. "Good," she said, skipping the lecture for now. "I've told you my news," he said. "You tell me yours." "I don't know what you mean." She huffed and reached for the remote. How about we watch some TV? We have last Thursday and Friday's Jeopardy episodes still. She flicked on and navigated the DVR to the show before he could say anything at all. The theme music filled the room. He raised an eyebrow at her but let it go, settling back into the chair and flicking his gaze to Alex and the contestants. Millie had become an expert at the television since Freddie taught her the basics. She could even make Netflix and Amazon Prime work, too. In fact, she'd become the tech support for the entire wing when the kids were away at school. And not only for TV, but for the internet, too. She spent too much time online arguing with people that had no business having opinions, let alone speaking, typing them out loud. But what else was a retired attorney going to do? They settled into the companionable silence of sweetmates. Millie did her best to ignore the lump in her pocket as it seemed to pulse silently in time with her own beating heart. They lived in the most free-form of the buildings on campus. Everyone there had all their faculties, mental and physical. A couple years ago, Millie had retired, selling the firm to two of the young attorneys that shared the practice. Now her name was still on the sign outside, but that was the extent of her involvement. Retirement hadn't suited her. She took care of her life just fine, but boredom was killing her. So when Miss Jones, her ancient cat, passed away, Millie toasted to the cat's 20 years and made the decision to move. Antiques and Curators, her personal name for Sunset Hills, which sounded more like a cemetery than a place to live, had a full medical staff and hospital on campus. She could start out at the ultra-independent level and move further and further in until she needed round-the-clock care, or so the brochure said. She planned on being long dead before that happened. What really sold her on A&C was its ingenious plan. Everyone in her level of care had a suite mate, someone to keep an eye, offer company, make sure they were doing okay. Each had their own bedroom and an in-suite bath, while they shared a living room and kitchenette. In exchange for being around a certain number of hours per week and pushing the big red button on the wall in case of emergencies, students got free room and board. A&C, quote, tried to match suite mates of similar backgrounds and interests, end quote, according to their slickly produced literature and website. When the intake nurse waved a faux scolding finger at her and said, "You were both quite the challenge to match," Millie imagined that there weren't a lot of young people that wanted to live with an old retired lawyer, but her standards had been pretty low, alive. Gender, sexuality, race, age, didn't matter. Her "help us match you" essay had probably come off as a bit over the top, what with self-descriptions like feminazi and no bullshit. But what was wrong with the kid? She demanded the file. Freddie was a 19-year-old man, pre-med, 4.0 GPA at UNC. Local kid. His essay said he had a hard time affording tuition, room, and board, even at a state school, especially with his plans for med school. He sounded charming. Then Millie looked at the picture. "When do we move in together?" she said. So Millie, a 72-year-old retired family law attorney, ended up rooming with a 20-year-old pre-med student. He made her laugh and was pretty to look at. She treated him like a grandson. He treated her like a grandmother. Since neither of them had those in their lives, it worked. He'd asked her stories about her younger days, as if those were interesting. Millie assured him that they were too boring to repeat. He helped her with her smartphone, her computer, her Kindle, anything to keep her from watching TV all day and wasting away. She kept him from studying too much, and he made sure she got out of the house. All in all, a beautiful arrangement, which, in Millie's experience, meant that it surely wouldn't last.
Very nice.
Hi, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gail Z. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and steampunk. And this is from the Spell, Salt, and Steel first book in that series. It's a tie-in, a loose tie-in, John Hartness's Bubba the Monster Hunter series, although they never actually intersect. And it's set up in my native northwestern Pennsylvania. So here we go. When all else fails, the ass end of a carp makes a damn fine weapon. I'd been lying in wait for the ninja to show up, and by the wee hours of the morning, I was tired and cranky and out of coffee. As soon as the sun went down, I pulled into the Linesville, Pennsylvania spillway. The tourists were gone, and so's my screen.
Ouch.
This doesn't happen with paper. The tourists were gone and the concession stands gates were closed. Still blows my mind how many people will come and look at a bunch of fish, even if those fish are a boiling, writhing mass of 3-foot-long, 20-pound carp that look like something out of a biblical plague. I'm Mark Wojcik, mechanic and monster hunter. I gank things that go bump in the night, so most people never have to know that supernatural uglies exist outside of bad horror movies. No one chooses this life. It chooses you, usually in a violent and awful way. In my case, a deer hunt turned into a Wendigo hunting us. I survived, barely, but my father, brother, uncle, and cousin didn't. Neither did the Wendigo when I was done with it. The carp weren't my problem. Tourists loved throwing day-old bread into the water to watch the carp roil over each other, mouths gaping. Tonight, they weren't the only ones with an unnatural interest in big fish. A corpse-pale creature balanced on the low concrete rim of the spillway catch basin. It stood about 5 feet tall, slender with long arms, and a body that looked like a giant white tadpole of arms and skinny short legs. Ninjin can get as big as 60 feet, or so the cryptid sites say. But then again, they say that ninjin are only found in Japan, so I don't put much stock in them. Koko ni sakana no kau ga karu, I called to it, betting that a Japanese monster might understand Japanese. Then again, I'd looked up key phrases on Google Translate, so God only knows what I actually said. Come here, fish face, I repeated in English, in case the ninjin was bilingual. The ninjin cocked its round head and blinked its solid black eyes. I leaned over the railing and waved my bait at it, a nice piece of salmon I'd paid $15 for at the supermarket, thinking the creature might want an upgrade. That's it, I coaxed, dangling the prime wild salmon and giving it a shake. That's a good little sakana ninoko. That's the magic of translation. Fish fucker sounds classier in a foreign language. If the ninjin felt offended, it didn't look it, although for all I knew I'd been descriptive instead of insulting. The ninjin raised its head and opened its mouth, scenting the air. It shuffled toward me on stubby legs, like it had its pants down around its knees. I grinned, keeping the sharpened iron harpoon blade concealed behind my back in my right hand. At the speed the ninja hop-walked, it might take it 10 minutes to get to me, but once I ganked him, I'd be back home relaxing with a nice cold beer. That's when the damn thing leapt into the air like a horny salmon going to spawn and grabbed the fillet in my hand so hard he pulled me over the fence and into the carp-filled water. I lost the piece of fish, but managed to keep the harpoon. When I fell in, fully clothed and in my steel-toed boots, I thought I'd sink. But I fell onto the roiling carp that made a lumpy, moving net beneath me. They buoyed me along just long enough for me to regain my wits and scramble onto the small stretch of rocky shore between the overflow basin and the wall below the fence. The ninjin crouched, eyeing me as it shoved the raw salmon into its mouth, and I got a look at its jagged, sharp teeth. Something else the cryptid reports had been less than accurate about. I realized then that the small strip of land around me was covered with fish bones. Those all-black eyes kept staring at me, and although I had heard long pig tasted like chicken, this jagoff looked like he was wondering how much I'd taste like fish. It sprang at me, and I rolled, gritting my teeth as the sharp stones and fish bones jabbed through my jacket and jeans. I brought up my harpoon gun and got off a shot. The barbed iron blade hit the ninjin in the shoulder instead of the chest like I hoped, but it must have hurt like a mother, since the thing let out an ungodly howl that would have put any loon to shame. I yanked on the rope attached to the base of the blade with all my might. The ninjin stumbled toward me, then it grabbed the rope and pulled, and I found myself face down in the water getting smacked in the head by carp the size of toddlers. I scrambled back onto the rocky bank. What little I could find about ninjin that was written in English said it would have less power on land. I yanked the rope again, getting angry now, and the ninjin bared its barracuda teeth at me and gave another ear-splitting shriek. The iron had an effect on it. I could see black veins radiating from where the blade lodged in its shoulder, spreading across the once perfect white skin. I just didn't know how long the iron blade would take to kill the creature, or if it would do the job completely. My gun was safe and dry in my truck, since I figured going for a forced swim was likely, but I had a few more tricks up my soggy sleeves. The ninjin closed in on me, and I grabbed a kata, one of those martial arts sickle blades from a scabbard on my back. I didn't know if Japanese weapons were extra lethal on Japanese monsters, but I fully intended to go ninja on its ass for leaving me soggy and freezing and smelling like carp. "Let's see you, Shine, you piece of fish shit," I muttered. I watched as much anime as my Crunchyroll subscription could handle, and I'd picked up a few overused phrases. Die seemed like a good one. Except the ninja didn't seem to take it the way I intended and jerked me back into the water. I managed to roll so I got the kata blade between us and swung as hard as I could, sinking the point of the curved blade into its chest, where I hoped its heart might beat. The black veins from the iron blade had spread across its entire torso, up its fish belly white neck, and down its overly long arms. But it wasn't dead yet, and it came at me again, forcing me to fall backward into the water to get into another massive carp. I kicked with my legs to get some distance between me and the ninja. The carp weren't pleased to have me land on them, and one of the fish jumped out of the water and landed in my arms, all 30 pounds of him. Instinct took over, and I wrapped both arms around the carp's middle and thrust its powerful tail toward the ninja. The fish wriggled madly in my grip, its tail slapping back and forth with sharp scales and fins. It knocked the harpoon deeper into the ninja's chest as the black lacework of the iron's poison spread across the rest of its skin. I got my feet under me and dragged myself onto the shore, still holding a pissed-off carp between me and the monster. The ninja lurched forward, grabbing for me with its long skeletal arms and clammy, dead-white hands. Then it fell over and lay face down in the carp. completely covered by the deadly pattern of the iron's taint running through its veins. Tora, 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 that fish fucker, I muttered. I dropped the carp, and it disappeared into the roiling mass of its companions. I hauled myself back up the rocky shore and caught my breath. The night was warm, but that's a relative statement in this neck of northwestern Pennsylvania, and I started to shiver. The Ninjin lay where it fell, and I was just about to pull it out of the water when I saw its body twitch. "Oh, no, you don't," I growled. But before I could climb up the wall to get my gun out of the truck, the carp began to thrash. My stomach turned as I realized that the Ninjin wasn't moving on its own. Its body jerked and moved because dozens of carp were nibbling on its flesh. In the next moment, the Ninjin's form sank lower, pulled down by the fish. The pale body vanished beneath the water, and the fish fought each other to get closer, obscuring it from view. "Hey, buddy, no fishing!" I turned and got a face full of flashlight beam, blinding me. The perfect end to a lousy evening would be getting arrested for monstercide. Or, in this case, fishing without a license. "Oh, it's you, Mark." I blinked and recognized a familiar voice. Louis Marino, a guy I'd known since first grade and one of Linesville's finest. "Not fishing, Louis, honest, just business." Louis's one of the few cops who know what I really do. He gets it, mainly because when he had a nasty little infestation of demon-possessed rabid raccoons a few years back, I took care of it for him, no questions asked. "Keeping busy?" he asked, angling the flashlight so I could see again. "Always. They pay you enough to be on fish patrol at this hour?" Louis shrugged. "Working nights this week, through the short straw. Just another day in paradise." He wrinkled his nose. "You stink like carp."
What a great place to end.
And that's Spell, Salt, and Steel.
Cool. Wonderful, thanks. Ada.
I always like stories that have a good dose of slapstick comedy in it.
Okay, I'm Ada Mullen Brown. I write usually folklore-based fantasy, but I occasionally break out into science fiction. And this, I'm going to be reading from, I'll see how far I get from the story called Tiny Problems. The three demonstrators standing in front of the World Health Director's desk wore elaborate costumes. At least the director supposed they were demonstrators. They surely couldn't be dressed for some holiday celebration. In the 9 years she'd worked at the World Health Organization offices in Geneva, Switzerland, she'd never encountered a Swiss holiday that involved people dressing up as death, a surgeon in scrubs, and an 8-foot-high, 8-foot-wide replica of a pregnant Neolithic statue. But if they were demonstrators, what were they protesting? A deadly disease involving pregnancy? Zika wasn't deadly, and Ebola didn't specifically target the pregnant. And how had they gotten an 8-foot costume through the door? The gigantic Neolithic belly expanded toward her, then fell back. And how were they making it breathe? The woman dressed as a surgeon nudged the statue's hip with the back of a latex-gloved hand. Her surgical mask, hanging below her chin, exposed a face with Mediterranean features, Greek or perhaps Italian. "Nana, focus! Look at how the building is sized for the mortals inside it." The statue shrank down to the height of its two companions. A female voice came from the lower part of its featureless stone face. "There's a building here? Since when?" How had the demonstrators shrunk the statue? The death costume seemed like an actual human skeleton dressed in red and blue robes and a jeweled crown. The skull's mouth flapped open and closed. You can't expect Nana to notice anything current. The director had seen skeletons dressed in robes and crowns when she'd attended a conference on intestinal parasites in Mexico City. Santa Muerte, the Mexicans called them. Maybe this was about Zika then. But never mind that. The director's surprise gave way to caution. In these days of constant terror incidents, she mustn't take any chances. She slid her hand to her phone and scrolled to the alarm app, while she also glowered at the demonstrators over her glasses. "How did you get in here?" Someone downstairs wasn't doing their job. "That won't be necessary," said the surgeon. The phone jerked away from the director's hand to the other side of the desk. "All we ask is that you listen to us." How had they made the phone move? The director shrank back. "Listen to what? Who are you?" Something besides the costumes was very odd about these people, but they didn't seem like terrorists either. They spoke French just like most of the Swiss in Geneva. Not with an unusual accent as far as the director knew. Of course, her native language was Cantonese, so perhaps she couldn't tell. The woman in scrubs gave an impatient sniff. We are the Fates. I'm not familiar with that organization or the meaning of your costumes. I am Decima, said the surgeon, the goddess of childbirth. Goddess of childbirth. The director pictured Kuan Yin in her white and gold robes. Decima nodded. Yes, Kuan Yin is the Chinese goddess of childbirth. Director gasped. Had Decima read her mind? No, of course not. It would only have taken a short Google search to determine that the World Health Director was Chinese. Decima continued, I am the Roman goddess of childbirth. When this city, Geneva, was part of Rome, its people believed in me until the Christians arrived. She reached out to the two others. These are my sisters. I am Nana, goddess of pregnancy, boomed the Neolithic statue. I am Morta, said the skeleton. I suspect you know what I'm goddess of. Morta muerte, the same word, death, the Spanish derived from Latin. The director now remembered hearing of the Fates as a Western metaphor for destiny, but not as goddesses in the flesh. But then Kuan Yin had never appeared to her in the flesh, though the director had yearly, as one did at home in Hong Kong, borrowed red notes of money at her temple to pray for prosperity. Goddesses, it was surely just trickery, wasn't it? But until help came, it was best to humor them. She forced a smile. What do you wish, ladies? They said in unison, stop blocking the magic. What do you mean? As Morta raised a bony hand before her eye sockets, a crystal ball appeared, her finger bones clutching it. She tapped at it with her other hand. Timeline's still murky, but she likely won't listen. I'll try to make her listen. Decima took a step toward the desk. Look, certain ways of being born are signs of magic ability. Born covered by the amniotic sac, or seventh child of a seventh child. But fewer people are having 7 children. And all those Western doctors, and all those unnecessary C-sections Western doctors perform remove babies from the amniotic sac entirely. Magic has less conduits to enter the world. The director shrugged. We don't need magic, we have technology. Decima frowned. It's not about needing magic. I hope you're not asking us to promote larger families. We're finally succeeding in reducing family size in third world countries. Nana shook her faceless head. No, keeping pregnancy rates low is good for women. Decima said, but if the world would just limit C-sections, the director sighed. We already have many nations limiting women's access to birth control, abortions, and childcare. Now you want to limit labor and delivery. If I suggested that, the United Nations would fire me, especially if it's to have, she waved her hands, extra magic. Decima shook her head. That's not, the director interrupted. Surely magic births were always rare. Now we have a much greater population than in the past. Statistically speaking, there might be just as many magic births as before. Decima glared. You're not listening. The more people, the more... Morta gasped. Nana's head turned. What? Morta tapped the crystal ball. It's starting, Decima said. Why didn't you say so sooner? We've wasted time. Morta's skull bent over the ball. I couldn't tell till now which timeline the world would follow. Decima pointed out. Go! The director's desk morphed into a metal gurney. She leaped to her feet. The air suddenly had a strong disinfectant smell. They were also somewhere else now, but where? She looked around. Where her leather office chair was now the middle of a line of plastic chairs. On the wall behind them and around the room was painted images of a farm, such as the director had seen in American films. A barn You done?
Yes.
Okay, I'll finish the sentence. A wooden fence and a cornfield. Except with baby farm animals. I'm going to say the next sentence. Behind the fence, in the center of the room, 2 policemen hovered over a teenage girl in handcuffs. Ooh.
Good
Teaser stuff.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, let's see. I think I changed my mind, actually, since we have a small group. I'm going to read something I don't think y'all have heard before. You have heard a long time ago a version of this short story called Stasis that will be appearing in an anthology called Chasing the Light, coming out later this year. Oops. All right. So, the reptilian gold eye never blinked, his head hovering motionless above mine as I hunched over the kitchen counter. His slow breaths warmed my back against the Chicago winter cold that seeped through the high-ceilinged loft, no matter how heated the buildings were. Of course, the complex human living quarters weren't kept nearly as warm as the nest. "You've been very patient tonight. I'm about done here," I said in the deep voice he found most soothing. He rested his chin on my head as I slid bead after bead onto the long needle, tugging them down the thread into place on the glittering statue I would sell in the complex gift shop. Finally, I tied off the last line of beads and stood up, stretching, to admire my night's handiwork. Not bad, I thought, of the 4 beaded statues before me. I hardly painted anymore. My quilled and beaded creations sold much better. All my living expenses were taken care of at the complex, so my art sales went into savings for my future. Not that I gave much thought to a future away from here. I hardly saw the movement as he bent down and snapped up all 4 figures in a hungry gulp. "Tyr," I yelled, "I worked all night on those, you big jerk." I clapped my hands and stomped my feet, loud disapproving sounds that made him duck his head and look somewhat guilty. The cat chose that moment to leap up on the counter and saunter across, swishing her fluffy white tail. She did seem to love lording her mammalian status over him. Suddenly, Tyr's claws were around her waist, lifting her up. He chuffed, and she ignored him with her usual aplomb. Was she that brave or just stupid? I never was sure. But she calmly waited as I reprimanded him yet again. "Tyr, put her down." He hung his head and lowered his torso to release her gently on the floor. She brushed up against him as she wandered away. No hard feelings, apparently. He swung his head over to me, and I absent-mindedly reached up to scratch along his jaw. "I guess it's time to get you home, big boy. The professor doesn't like you to be out of the nest so late." We headed out to the parking lot behind the enormous warehouse apartments, and I climbed in my gold hybrid VW Beetle. As I rolled down the window and started the engine, Tyr crouched behind the car and swished his tail. I was tired after a long night focused on the beads, and still frustrated over the wasted effort, but I grinned as I eyed him in the rearview mirror. He loves street chases, and obviously we could only indulge in that particular treat in the wee hours when there would be virtually no cars or pedestrians in our path. I revved my engine and led him out through the complex gate and along our favorite loop, a combination of long stretches on the lakefront and some of the reliably deserted office areas downtown. No matter how sanguine the city had become about the professor's dinosaurs inside the complex, someone always freaked out if they saw a Tyrannosaurus Rex chasing a beetle down Fairfield Avenue or along Lakeside Boulevard. Best keep that sight to the occasional beat cop, garbage truck driver, and stoplight camera. They'd seen it all. Someone would see, of course. Someone with a vid phone. Tomorrow would be the inevitable wave of social media frenzy. The professor would grumble. But he didn't read me the riot act like the first few times. It wasn't actually illegal after all, and we always saw more tourists after videos cropped up showing one of our late night chases. Tyr loved to run, but I had to keep his body limits in mind. His heart and lungs were meant for short bursts, not long races. Soon we returned to the complex, and I led Tyr around to the back of the Nest Center, where it was easiest to get him in the dock bay doors. My fingers danced over the control pad to swing the doors open and quiet the chirping alarm before it rose to a klaxon. I didn't bother turning on any additional lights. I could walk all over the nest blindfolded. I took the dare for an easy $20 from every new grad student. Tyr's steps thudded dully on the specially made rubberized floors as we made our way in the dim emergency light amber glow back to his nest. He slowed outside the Parasophilus nests. I scratched his leg soothingly and whispered, "No, Tyr, no chasing now. We'll see if they want to run in the fields in the morning, okay, big boy?" He leaned down and gently butted his head against my back, pushing me forward. I laughed softly. Okay, come on, let's get you settled in stasis. Stasis was the professor's triumph. After the first dinosaur DNA was successfully cloned into viable eggs, there was a huge outcry over the Jurassic Park dangers, and all research was in danger of being permanently shuttered. The professor discovered an energy field that allowed each SAR to be bred, raised, and confined within their own signature resonance. Stasis combines all these SRs and weaves them into a kind of invisible dome that covers the entire complex, buildings and open spaces. I'm a neo-paleo artist, not an engineer tech, so I don't really understand how it works. But I often think of Arthur C. Clarke's wonderful line, any science sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. The energy feels like the slightest breeze on your skin or a buzz under your feet, like music you can't hear. But tourists, and none of the complex residents notice it after a while, but tourists always do. Each SAR's SR keeps them alive and safe on the complex. They couldn't survive more than a few hours outside, just long enough for the occasional educational program or festival photo op. And of course, Tyr never gets to go on those. With the tech's constant fine-tuning of the stasis SR for each SAR, they can be lulled to sleep in the nest or taken out anywhere on the vast complex grounds, which gives them freedom to run in the fields, under close supervision of their sponsors. Turns out every SAR needs to imprint on something when it hatches. The professor had a long line of sponsors in training, and he personally screened, chose, and trained a sponsor for each newly hatched SAR. We often debated among ourselves why he chose each person for which SAR. I had no idea why he chose me for Tyr. I mean, what made him think an artist would be suited to a T-Rex? But the professor was notoriously successful and close-mouthed about how he determined his choices. I came into the DSIP program my second year in grad school at Mount Holyoke, and I've lived on the complex ever since Tyr was hatched. After my parents died in the Amtrak crash of 23, returning home from my graduation, I rejected offers from family and friends to go live with them. Everything I need is in the complex. The professor encourages all 200 or so staff to live on campus, and we're like a close-knit family. I turned all my attention to my art and raising Tyr. I used to sneak him into my apartment to sleep with me, and when he became too big for that, I would climb into his nest and curl up with him, listening to his slow heartbeat and feeling his deep breaths push my head up and down in a steady rhythm. I love that big lunk. Aside from his occasional mischievous habit of eating my night's work, of course, I suddenly giggled as an image of his next glittery poop sprang in my mind's eye. I wondered what the keepers would make of that. They had to go through each and every steaming pile as part of the careful tracking program on each SAR's condition. We reached Tyr's nest and he snuggled down. I leaned against his head and scratched over his eye and along his snout as he tiredly huffed his pleasure and closed his golden eyes. As he settled into stasis, I gave him one last hug and headed for the door. Suddenly, I heard a noise. But that was impossible. Nothing should be moving in stasis. Nothing. I froze. Then I heard it again. A soft shoe step. Not claws, on the padded floor.
That's weird.
So I'm Samantha Bryant, and I write the Menopausal Superhero series. But today I am reading from a new piece that I'm hoping to bring out later in 2018. Its working title is Thursday's Children, and it came about because a friend invited me to be a part of a book bundle. I wasn't able to complete the book in time to be a part of a book bundle, but I was in, so I'm going to finish it now. The parameters were that it needed to be either post-apocalyptic or dystopian, young adult, and romance. I've never written any of those, so I thought, perfect. So Thursday's Children, which is probably dystopian, young adult, romance. And this is probably chapter 1. Okay. Kyla Wade stopped short. A man stood in front of her house, a stranger, a big muscular guy in a dark suit with a white earpiece coiling down into his collar, startling against his dark skin. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, rocking back and forth on his heels, the universal pose of a respectable thug. The man scanned the street, sweeping his gaze across the scene in slow, steady turns of his head. The sun glinted off his mirrored sunglasses, making him seem disconcertingly robotic. He lingered longest on the view from the top of the hill, where the bus would have dropped her off, if she'd taken the bus today. Instead, she had accepted a ride from Joan, who wanted to show off her new wheels.
They'd gone out to the Dairy Queen for an ice cream, then back to Joan's house so Kyla could retrieve the sweat jacket she left there. The shortest way back home was up the alley between houses, so she had cut through. Only luck saved her, allowing her to spot the man before stepping out into the sun and directly into the waiting trap. She had paused to dig her house key out of her backpack and looked back up just before she would have stepped from the shadows. She had almost yelped out loud in surprise at the sight of the strange man. Now she backed against the wall of the alley, tucked behind the shrubberies that bordered the across the street neighbor's house, the holly branches scratching at her skin. Her heart beat like it was trying to escape her chest, and she fought to breathe. Sinking down, she knelt between the bushes, trying to force down her panic. She knew what this meant. They hadn't put the yellow sign with the red triangle out in the yard yet, but she still knew. It was the EDC, the triangles. They already had her parents, and they must be looking for her. She opened her backpack, pulled out her phone, and shoved it under a decorative stone labeled with a child's handprint and plastic gemstones. She fought back tears as she slid along the wall, retracing her steps. Her mom and dad were already gone. It always went like that. First the parents, then the kids. Rumor had it that they used the kids to get the parents to cooperate. Kyla's mother had always said terrified children were more compliant, easier to cow and control. She could picture her mother's tight-lipped and serious face, the barely contained rage making her words bitter and harsh, so unlike the usual soft caress of her voice. Kyla would try not to be frightened. Her mama would want her to be brave. The first time she'd seen a triangle sign, Kyla had only been 6 years old. She'd come home from school and found her mother crying on the front porch. Her mama never cried, so her swollen cheeks and rheumy eyes astonished Kyla as much as they dismayed her. When she understood that Grandpa Wade was the reason for the tears, Kyla dropped her lunchbox and ran the 5 blocks to his house as fast as her short legs could carry her. Panting on the sidewalk, she didn't have to go inside to know the truth of what her mother had said. The door of the house had been busted in, the colorful panes of glass reduced to shards on the porch, glittering in the afternoon sun. A small yellow sign had been hammered into the garden among the squashed azaleas. It bore the angry red triangle of the Ethical Behavior Committee. When Kyla was 6, the red triangle was still a new thing, a novelty. Only a few had been seen in the city, and the people who had disappeared had been known troublemakers, agitators, zealots, angry people who made threats, the same across the country, according to the news. But the family weren't the only ones who were shocked when Isaiah Wade was taken. He was well respected in Alexandria, known for his kindness, a lawyer who would go to bat for the right cause, even if you couldn't pay him. Most people believed the EDC was protecting them from terrorism and extremists. Many spoke out in gratitude, even while others whispered their quiet concerns. Grandpa Wade, though, was a different case. Some people thought he'd been taken because he had a dark secret, that he'd been into something dangerous none of them had known about. Those people stopped accepting invitations to birthday parties and crossed the street to avoid walking past members of the Wade family. Others were sure he was innocent. A mistake had been made, or this proved their suspicions about the real purposes of the EDC. Those people brought pies at night and stayed to talk with Kyla's parents until the sun was nearly up again. Either way, it all changed after that. Today, her legs took her again to Grandpa Wade's house, the 5 blocks covered in only a couple of minutes, even when traveled through alleys in between the house's path. Her stride was a lot longer at age 16 than it had been back then. Running around the block, she arrived in the alley behind Grandpa Wade's old house, jumped the back fence in a practice movement, vaulted across the yard, and clambered up the ladder to the treehouse. When she popped her head through the trapdoor entrance, she came face to face with her cousin Nyasia, holding a baseball bat. Nyasia let the bat fall from her fingers and grabbed at Kyla's arms, pulling her up and the rest of the way inside. "They got your folks too?" Fat tears rolled down her cheeks, already stained with smeared mascara. Alicia and Jared, the 2 remaining Wade cousins, sat huddled on the floor, wide-eyed and looking younger and smaller than their 12 and 10 respective years. There was no going home for any of them. Not if all the Wade adults had been taken on the same day. Dropping her backpack, she stumbled and fell down in front of them, pulling her younger cousins to her and letting her tears fall freely. They were the last self-pitying tears she would allow herself to shed.
Looks great. Sounds great.
was like, what?
Sounds great. And well, we have ended up with extra time since we had a couple folks that were not able to join us. But thank you for reading. Thank you for listening.